All right, it is going. Cool. David, who are you?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is David Yu. I'm a graduating senior at Carnegie Mellon University studying business and computer science.
What else can you tell us about you?
Oh, I guess fun facts. I'm going to be working at Google after college as an associate product manager. This past year, I ran a restaurant on campus called Capital Grains.
Did you get paid?
Yes.
Oh, good. Cool. Okay, so I guess I think Pranav already went through the agenda, so I'm gonna skip the agenda and go into self-introduction. So David already introduced himself. So my turn. My name is Nancy. Hello, everybody. I was a student at CMU. I graduated in 2006. And I started my career as an engineer, and I did that for about 5 years. And then I transitioned into product management, and I've been in product management for about 11-ish years after that transition. And I've been in B2B and B2C companies, from startups to big tech companies like Meta, formerly known as Facebook, and most recently at Roku. I've also held leadership positions at these two most recent companies I worked at. But I struggled so much with the interview preparation. I failed the Meta interview twice before I got the job the third time. And I actually counted how many hours I prepped. It was easily over 100 hours. So the first prep took maybe 60 hours-ish, and then I failed. And then I tried again, and I did another maybe 40, 50 hours of prep, and I failed again. And then, but happily, the third time I was able to pass and I got the job. And then I stayed at Meta for about 6 years, and I became a PM manager maybe a year into my job at Meta. So I have a lot to say on this topic of PM interviewing after my own personal journey, and that's why I am very excited to spend time with this community today to hopefully be able to help so that no one needs to go through the same struggle that I went through. I knew that I was not prepping the right way. That it's not supposed to be that way. And that's why I'm here. And it also fits in with my personal mission perfectly, because now I'm a full-time PM coach and advisor. I just really want to equip folks out there with my own experiences, so you don't just avoid the mistakes that I made, but you're able to take what I learned and make it your own and go higher. Like, that's what I want to see the community evolve. That's how we get better as like human beings. And so I'm just very happy to be here today. This is my second session with CMU. I'm very happy that the product community at CMU is very active and is able to support events like this that I think are very, very meaningful. With that, I also want to quickly share that I put together Product Sense Masterclass that is happening 2 weeks from now in the month of May. But I don't want to spend too much time on this until after the mock interview. So with that, let's talk about what Product Sense is. This is a framework that was developed by Shreyas Doshi, and he is one of the most prominent and influential, if not the most influential PM advisors out there today. He says it like this: there are 3 elements to Product Sense. The first one is empathy. The second one is domain knowledge. And then the third bucket of Product Sense is creativity. And the first bucket, empathy, this is all about how well do we know the user? What problem is the user having? What feelings are they having when they're faced with those problems? And how are they reacting to those problems. And then domain knowledge is something that is very specific to that company and to that industry that the company is in. It has to do with who their competitors are, what technology they're using, what are their strengths and weaknesses. And then the third bucket being creativity. This is when the PM comes up with novel ideas and solutions to then address the problem for our users in a way that also makes sense for the company, because we want these creative solutions to be differentiations for the company. Now, some companies out there do not require domain knowledge, because out of the three, domain knowledge is the easiest to learn. It is a lot harder to learn empathy and creativity. And so a lot of companies out there do not require domain knowledge. Of course, it's a plus, but some companies don't require it. So for today's mock interview, we're not going to go over domain expertise. Now, there's another thing I want to share, which is product sense questions not only come in different flavors, but also different levels of difficulty. Now, I've conducted over 200 interviews when I was at Meta, and I was also on hiring committees. So based on my own experience, I put these in 3 different buckets based on my experience. The easier bucket of product sense questions is where the user segment is defined in the question already. That makes it simpler to then define a problem and then propose a solution. So an example is build a product to help people find roommates, or build a product to help people find doctors, etc. So notice that the segment, the user segment, is already given to you. It's doctor and patient, right? Or it's people looking for roommates. That means they're not with a family. Well, maybe they're with family, but you know what I mean, right? The user segment is already given to you, so you don't have to segment it in different ways. Then we have the second bucket, which is the medium level. This is where the problem requires some segmentation before you can segment the user. And an example there is we want to build a product for travel, or we want to build a product for health, we want to build a product for sports. Now, this is where the space is really big, and you don't want to just segment the user right away. First, you want to understand what is the problem space. If we're talking about health, what does health mean? Is it physical health? Is it mental health? Is it, if it's mental health, like what aspects of mental health? Why is it important, etc. Right? Once we define and segment the problem space, then we define the users. And then the third bucket, which I think is the hardest level, is where it involves a lot more strategic thinking. This is where you're considering the company's goals, strengths, weaknesses before identifying the problem. After you identify the problem, then you segment it, right? So an example here is if the CEO of the company that you're interviewing for gives you 10 engineers, what would you do? Or if Biden gives you $10 million, what would you do, right? This is where the space is huge. And you can't just like randomly segment. You kind of need to anchor on some kind of strategic thinking. Pick a strength area to focus on, and then you segment it further. So this to me is the hardest level in terms of product sense interview questions. And then the other side of this discussion is, now that you answer the question, how do interviewers assess your answers? They're looking at how you arrived at your target segment. They're looking at how you're defining the problem. And they're also thinking, did you randomly, quote unquote, randomly pick a space to focus on? Is it rooted in some strategic thinking? Is it a sound judgment, right? Did you need the interviewer's help to narrow down the problem space? If so, then you come across more junior compared to someone who could apply some strategic framework and apply sound judgment when they're narrowing down the space. That is where you come across more senior. And notice I'm using the term come across. You're coming across one way, but it doesn't mean that's who you are, right? It doesn't mean that properly represents your skill set as a PM. It has to do with how you're answering the question. And that is why it's so important to prep properly in a way that kind of addresses the questions that the interviewer has. And keep in mind, the reason why they're asking product sense questions is because it gives them a sense on how you make product decisions. Because on the job, you have to make these product calls. And if you're randomly making calls, that's not good for the product, right? It could be the right call, but then you also need to explain why this is important, why this is a priority, why this is the strategy, right? So that is why the product sense interview is so important and so crucial to the PM journey. So with that as kind of like a background, let's do the actual product sense interview. So I actually don't have a question in mind. So let's just go with it. So I'm going to put on my interviewer hat. And if I feel compelled to jump in, I will. Okay, so David, what do you like to do on your free time? What are your hobbies?
Yeah, I guess in my free time, my biggest hobbies include cooking, going to the gym. I enjoy catching up on world news. I enjoy building software projects and learning about the business and technology.
Okay, cool. Based on your interest areas, let's have you build a product for food. If you
Okay.
were trying, if you were trying to build something related to food, what would you build?
Yeah, great question. So I guess I can start and go through my process as well as I go through this question. And I think that'll help me both determine what I want to go about for solving this question and help other people out to determine how I think about this problem and how I want to refine your question to, better scope it out in a way that would, I would answer in a realistic setting as well. So I guess the first thing I'd like to go is that usually when you're starting on a question like this, the question you asked me is build a product around food.
Mhm.
Now, this is very high level, which means that there's so many directions to go with it. A lot of people coming in for a question like this will be like, oh, I'm so scared. There's so much going on. How do I break it down into something that's more manageable, more tangible, and more realistic for me to answer in a 30-minute setting? So I think for me, when you say build a product around food, immediately the first thing I think of is some type of kitchen equipment. For me, I'm really big into chef knives and figuring out how you can determine what best equipment you need to use to be able to better, improve your efficiency and operations in the kitchen. At least from my personal experience, that's an area that I think is a huge benefit, is to have better equipment on that side. And, as with any good product that improves your operations, both for a B2B or a B2C, having the right tools is essential to improving yourself for the business or for the consumers as well. So I guess for my first step and for my background, that's an area that I think we would want to take a question like this. Does that sound good to you?
What other areas surrounding food have you considered before kind of looking at the kitchen equipment area?
Yeah, so I guess for food, if we want to start talking specifically at a higher level, maybe I would start and say, is there anyone you specifically want us to address this problem for? Are there any key stakeholders that you're looking at there? Is there any specific problem you would like me to solve related to food for this type of question that you're asking?
No, I don't have anyone in mind. I'm just curious how you think about the space before finalizing and focusing on kitchen equipment.
Mm-hmm. So I guess starting out in an actual interview setting, I think I would focus on first determining a key user first and figuring out, starting out and seeing perhaps a series of key users, and then going through a series of questions to determine which of those key users we would want to focus on for this interview. And then once determining what that key user is, going through and listing a few key pain points for those types of users to then, determine what the solution may be for that end. Is that kind of the direction you're looking for?
Yeah. So before we pick a key user, what areas come to mind when it's food related? So for example, it could be people going out to eat. It could be people cooking at home. It could be people working at restaurants, and all kinds of different aspects surrounding food. It could be pizza delivery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which of these areas do you think is the most impactful given, let's focus on the US, right? Let's narrow
Sure.
it down. Given what we know about US and how people eat, which aspect of food and eating do you think is most impactful? It could also be around like grocery shopping. That is another area that is related to food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think for me then personally, the area that would be most impactful for me is probably like kitchen work. So the key users being those people who work and like prepare the food at restaurants, at different establishments there, in order for those key customers on that end. So that's like a key user segment that I think we could probably focus on for this problem.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay, so I think for this specific user group, there are a couple of key pain points I think we would want to address and highlight to determine how we want to, supposedly build a product for food. For the current service worker journey that they go through, there's a lot of back-end work and prep work to be able to, create a large-scale restaurant and be able to prepare food for hundreds, if not thousands of people. Right. There's a lot of manual labor involved on a lot of different ends. And for them specifically, there's a whole process of making sure that you have the right food and groceries come at the right time, right? Because you have your ordering forms that you prepare, and then you want to make sure that everything along those lines are prepared well. On the other hand, you also have the customer service and hospitality side, more of the kind of like the front-facing work that's required. And I think problems along those lines specifically come around making sure that you have good customer service guidelines, making sure that you have a strong hospitality service there, and making sure that you have a good line of communication between back of the house and front of the house as well. Is this kind of the direction you'd like to see us go? Is there something else you'd like me to focus on?
Can you just quickly remind me again, why is focusing on this segment impactful?
Yeah, of course. So I think if we look at it from a purely industry perspective, the restaurant industry hospitality industry as a whole is like a $1 trillion industry. And because of such, we think that this user group has a lot of problems that they face on a daily basis that we think a new type of product would potentially be able to solve as well. I think, is there a specific area, a specific criteria we want to look for when we determine our key user groups? Is there a monetization play we're looking at here? Is this like an accessibility play? Is there a key kind of metric or a framework you'd like me to focus on when determining why we want to focus on this user group over another?
I'm thinking maybe reach.
Reach.
So, for example, if we solve problems for the service worker, what impact would that then have on the surrounding community around this service worker? So if we
Yeah.
fix the problem, what happens after that? That is what I mean by reach and impact.
I see. Yeah, thank you for the clarification. I think the impact there is that because, everyone has to eat, everyone goes to restaurants, and I think being able to build a product for service workers has a significant compounding effect for the people around them. I don't know specifically numbers wise how we'd quantify that, but just to give a little bit of an estimation, here for CMU, for example, for the work that I did for Capital Grains, we had roughly 12 members on my team where we worked together to do culinary work on that end. And we were able to impact roughly around 600 students every weekend or so. So with that, if we were to compound that to a national level as well, we could expect a similar thing there. Where it's like you have an impact for like each one service member you may be able to help, perhaps the impact that they would be able to help other people, either through improvements in efficiency, improvements in their logistics or operations, probably would be around 50-fold.
And what type of, this is great that you have personal data point that we can anchor on. What was the impact that the 600, was it 600 students at CMU? What was the impact that they experienced?
Yeah, so for them, they were able to get a good meal out of the money that they have, either through like their dining plan on campus or through their credit card. And I think for them, obviously, the main pain point that we were trying to solve with all that restaurant was to provide like a healthy meal. And I think what we were able to showcase with that initiative and with that program was that we were able to, acquire market share on the weekend on-campus dining experience by selling a product that people, wanted to eat. And I think though the impact isn't as big as say, like building out a, huge new product that'll revolutionize their business or anything, that 1 hour, one meal difference makes a huge difference when you have a lot of like TA work, a lot of assessments, a lot of assignments on campus, and you need some type of product to keep you going and keep you fueled for the experience.
Great. So if I were to kind of summarize that impact, it's then affecting the 600 students' sentiment on their experience while attending CMU, right? With healthier food in a kitchen that is running very efficiently, their overall experience at CMU is improved. What does that mean? Let's take a step further, right? What happens when the students are happy? Then when they're feeling their best, they're performing their best. When they are eating healthy food, they're able to show up to their classes and learn and do a good job and, achieve their goals, right? And then what does that mean? It means now we have brand loyalty. Now we want everyone to go to CMU. Right? So that is a ripple effect. So this impact is now that we think about it, this impact is not just about making the kitchen workers work in a more efficient way. It has a ripple effect. And that's why it's important to think about not just first degree type of impact, but second and third degree. And then what is that feedback loop? What is that flywheel? That's all signals that go into how well do you understand and how are you thinking about this problem space? Okay, so now we're really high up there, right? Now we're talking about like student sentiment and like brand loyalty. Now let's come back down. Great. Let's focus on the kitchen worker. What pain points and like what is your journey like?
Yeah, I can definitely go into this. So in terms of like the user journey currently for the service worker, for someone on my team for this semester, one of the main things that they have to go through is a lot of specifically with prep work, right? On Fridays and Saturdays when we have to prep for our service for Saturday, there's a lot of equipment involved, there's a lot of people involved, and there's like a whole list of tasks that we have to go through, right? And right now, currently, the process for us and for a lot of people go through this, it's very manual, and there's not really like a tech element to it. There's not really a product in place to make sure that that whole process goes smoothly and that every step is well done. That's like one key pain point that I think is a major highlight, at least from my experience, and that my team has talked to me about. A second major pain point for the service workers and for anyone running in the restaurant industry is certainly the produce, making sure that produce comes on time and the right produce comes on time. This is a huge problem within this industry because there's always supply chain logistics and always problems on all ends to make sure that, you know, food arrives at the right place at the right time. Because if it doesn't arrive at the right place, you don't have the food. If it doesn't arrive at the right time, it could potentially spoil, it could potentially have issues, and you obviously can't serve customers in that end. Another key thing, I think, for restaurant work as a whole is certainly the accounting and kind of like people management software there. So there's a couple of softwares that the industry uses regarding, you know, managing people and then managing finances there. So figuring out, because for most people in the restaurant industry, they aren't very tech literate. And most people don't have college degrees in that sense either. So it's important to build out technology that's very user accessible and very user friendly to make sure that if they're managing their staff or if they're managing their finances, that they're able to do so in a very seamless manner. I think on top of that, another pain point is labor scheduling, figuring out to make sure that you have enough people to work on the days that you need and to be able to potentially have, you know, have an ability to go through and seamlessly track how many hours people are working and then determine, you know, how much each person is getting paid as such, or if you need more people to work for that weekend as necessary. So these are a couple of like high level pain points, both in terms of the product as well as the people involved for this entire process. And I think just to kind of summarize it, first is focusing on the back end. So definitely figuring out which produce to order, when to order it, that's a key problem. The second one that I addressed was figuring out the prep work required, building out that entire process and making sure that all steps are done there to see if there's potentially any solution from a tech side to figure out and improve that process. The third one that I talked about was regarding the employee management process, figuring out if potentially there's any better way to better do the finances or management for employees there. And then finally, the fourth pain point that I talked about was regarding labor scheduling, to make sure that to help employers build a better platform to manage their employees and figure out their labor scheduling at that end. Is there anything you'd like me to go more in depth with there?
Would you say number one and number two are service worker facing? And then number three, like managing finances. And then number four, labor scheduling are service manager facing.
Yeah, good question. I think if we wanted to be more specific in this end, I think just potentially the service worker who are just focused on the operations, the management side for the third and fourth pain point that I addressed for like the labor scheduling and the accounting and finances stuff is not something that the service worker is going to be doing on that end. They're going to be more so doing the first two. So like figuring out how to order and when to order and making sure produce runs on time. And then a second thing being making sure that like when they have prep work required, that they have a nice schedule in place so they make sure they get everything done on schedule as well.
Great. So are you suggesting that we focus on the worker facing aspect, the operational aspect, instead of the management aspects?
Good question. So I guess when we take a look at these key users, these two users in the service industry and their pain points, going back to the root kind of focus of this question, you wanted me to really focus on reach. And I think if we want to really tie this back into that, I think one question that comes to my mind as we go through this question as a whole is, you know, which user do we want to focus on to maximize our reach for the most amount of people? And what I'm thinking from this problem is, okay, if you talk about the service manager or the employer, the owners of the restaurants, their reach is sure going to be on the community as a whole, on the customers, but that's usually through their employees, right? Through those service members. So if you have like a manager managing maybe 5 to up to 20 employees, their impact is primarily going to be on those 5 to 20 employees. On the flip side, if you look at the service workers themselves, what you'll see is that they are actually the ones that are customer facing. They're the ones actually prepping the food, actually serving the customers. And as such, they're the ones that have that additional reach and significant kind of have the ability to shape the customer's experience, whether, talking about my experience for Capital Grains on campus and helping those customers there and really like changing their weekend experience, or for any restaurant service member on that sense. So I think because of this analysis here, and because of kind of these two takeaways from these two user groups, I think it would be better and more fruitful for us to focus on the service members who are doing the operations, the prep work, and the ordering, rather than the service managers, in order to accomplish our end goal of maximizing our reach.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess now that we've kind of talked about this a bit further, I'd like to further dive into kind of the two key pain points that I talked about and see if there's potentially one we want to focus on based off of our solutions, our resources, anything there. So my first thought is, for any prep work required, there's currently, usually some process in place. Everyone does it slightly differently, but there's nothing really like centralized to be able to kind of go through and like make an actual checklist. Right now, the current process that we went through, and I think a lot of restaurant managers go through, is they make a spreadsheet, they make a checklist, and they kind of like check off each thing as they go along, whether it's like prepping some type of vegetables, cooking chicken or something along those lines, and then making sure that it's kind of like a play by ear kind of strategy, in the sense that there isn't really a very formal strategy there or a formal process in place. So I think that main pain point that I see arising from that is that, especially when there's a lot going on, it's very easy for the service member to get confused, and most importantly, to get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
When you're juggling 20 different ingredients at a time, it's very easy to miss one thing, and then that can cause a whole backlog for both yourself and your team. So that's kind of like one key major aspect of that pain point there. And then the second one that I like to focus on and then determine which one we really want to dive into for a solution is for the ordering process for the service members, making sure that, currently the way that a lot of companies do it is they have like a partner, whether it's like Cisco Food Services or another like middle food services provider, who makes sure that they get their produce on time. And there's not currently a process of clear transparency or communication. It can be frustrating for the service members to be able to go through and know exactly when food is going to arrive and where it's going to arrive because of that lack of transparency. So I think that's a major pain point that we could potentially come up with solutions for that user journey as well.
Do you see pain points around planning for the produce that they're ordering? Because now we're talking about they have transparency on when the food is arriving, but then someone has to order. Someone has to figure out what to order and how much and by when. Like, you need to place the order and then you receive it, right? Is there a pain point around planning what to order? And planning is also like a big area in itself. To plan, you need to have an expectation on demand. How do we know how many students are coming to this cafe? How do we know how much to order? We don't want to waste, etc. Right? So how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a problem that I actually face, every week for Capital Grains as well, is figuring out how much of each ingredient to order. And there's also currently, it's very much so you look at some historical data, you look at some type of factors such as weather, such as big events happening here and there on campus, but specifically for planning and ordering, more or less, it's basically like a guess and check kind of strategy. There's very little ability to be able, because there's so much fluctuation and so much volatility within this market, to determine how much food to buy in order to make sure that you maximize the amount of food you can make for your customers while making sure you don't stock out, while also minimizing the amount of waste and potential leftover because, you know, you bought too much and, you know, food's going to spoil.
Yeah, imagine your cafe doesn't have food and you have hungry students.
Yeah.
That's bad, right? All right, so I love these pinpoints. And just as a side note, I always shoot for 3, if possible, because there's something about the number 3 that people kind of just gravitate to. And so this is not the interviewer talking, this is just the friend talking here. If possible, always shoot for 3. 3 segments, 3 pain points, 3 solutions, etc. Okay. Now putting back the interview hat. All right, so now that we have 3 pain points, do you have other pain points that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I certainly think that, you know, if we had hours on end, there's a lot more that I could talk about. But I think for this interview and for our focus here, these are the 3 pain points that I like to focus on. And I think what we would want to do now is kind of choose one of these pain points to focus on. And then I'll probably try to come up with maybe like 3 creative solutions on that end. I think that would probably be the best approach. I guess from talking about more specifically of my experience as well, I think that process usually works, having that back and forth between the interviewer and interviewee, because I think having that keeps it like more conversational as well, and then keeping them engaged to make sure that like you have a better sense of what I'm actually talking about, because sometimes, you know, it's very easy to get carried away with my own thoughts as well there.
Totally, yes. Always keep the conversational if possible.
Okay, so coming back to the 3 pain points, just to highlight what we just talked about, the first one was regarding the ordering. The second one was regarding prepping. And the third one was regarding planning. So looking at these 3, if we're going to be going back to the high level problem that we want to solve, which is how do we maximize our reach for this solution? What I first think about is which of these 3 pain points causes the most pain for our key user in the sense, right? Which one takes the most time? Which one costs the most amount of money? Which one causes the most pain, quote unquote? And when I look at these 3, the main key metric I'm looking at to improve is probably going to be either something with money, either reducing cost, or with time, reducing the amount of time required to prep or there. And that's a trade-off because, you know, a solution for one thing is probably not going to be a solution for another pain point in the sense. For these 3 key problems and 3 key pain points that we addressed, my rationale is that the planning phase is actually going to be the most cumbersome, primarily because of the significant volatility within the amount that one person can order. For example, if your cafe is doing really well and you need to order like 10, you know, 25 pound bags of coffee beans, you want to make sure that you have enough for the 1,000 customers that come through. But let's say, you know, it's raining that day and, you know, your number of customers decreases by like 50%. Well, you have like half of your coffee bags left over. And, you know, that's something you need to account for your costs there. That's like kind of one area that I'm thinking about in terms of the key pain points there and why I think that may be a key focus. But before I, you know, go too much into that, I'd like to give a few key supporting arguments for the other 2 to make sure that this is the one that's the most valuable to go down. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So for the other 2, for the ordering, the key pain point that for the prepping work, the key pain point that we see there is probably regarding time, right? You know, all the produce is already here. You have this much to prepare. You also need to figure out how much of that produce you actually need to make. For example, if we go back to the cafe example and you need to make, you know, like 10 trays of brownies, you need to know how much of each ingredient you need to be able to make that as well. And though it's very easy to, you know, have some set recipe in place, there's still that scalability issue to making sure that you have, you know, if you're making like one thing, if you're making 10 things, how you're able to scale up your solution for the number of users or for the number of customers that you expect in this setting. But compared to the other problem, this still doesn't seem as, big of a reach component, because if we go back to that balance between time and money, one of the big things, and I think one of the prioritizations that we see for the service member, is that they obviously want to help improve their bottom line as well. And the best way to do that, I think the trade-off between the product cost and the labor cost for the service member here is probably going to be higher. The trade-off being that the product costs are likely going to be higher, considering that if we talk about it from like a cafe's perspective, it's likely that they have to order like hundreds of pounds of some ingredient in order to be able to maintain operations, which can fluctuate significantly. Whereas on the other hand, for their prep work, the amount of work for that specific worker may fluctuate between like 1 or maybe like 3 or 4 hours at most. So if you look at that trade-off in terms of a pure cost metric, that because for the time side, we can still change that to our root metric being money.
Yeah.
The labor hours would probably be in tens, maybe hundreds at most. But for the product cost, it could potentially be in the thousands or even higher, depending on the scale of the operation as well.
Makes sense.
Okay. And then the final thing that we talked about was regarding the ordering process as well. And I think the ordering process goes much more with the planning process. So we can kind of combine those two pain points together. So I think looking at these two kind of key areas, then I think our main focus, just to summarize, is that, there's a lack of, I guess to summarize the key pain point that we want to address going forward for this interview, there is a lack of, there's a lack of information that service members face when they decide how much they need to order of different ingredients. It can be a very frustrating process because week on week demand fluctuates, and they need to make sure that they have enough food, satisfy demand, while making sure that they don't order too much food such that they have a lot of waste and spoilage left over. So that's kind of the key pain point I think we should focus on for the rest of this interview. How does that sound to you?
That sounds great. So can you summarize it in terms of metrics now? So you said we want to minimize waste. So that would be a metric that we would need to measure, which is waste minimized or something like that.
Yeah.
What else?
So I think in terms of the key metrics that we would want to look at going forward, before we even dive into the solution and generating any of that, is figuring out, what are the key things from both the service member's perspective and the business's perspective that they want to, track, because that's what, metrics are meant for in this framework. I think certainly waste, if we want to be more specific there, it's like we could just do like pounds of different ingredients that are left over that are, maybe have to be composted, maybe have to be thrown out. I think that's a good key metric that you can look at there.
That's great.
In terms of other key metrics we want to do, I think, because this is a financial metric, we still want to go back to that bottom line, is that like how much, and then when we go back to how much food we're wasting, is how much money we're wasting, because that's the bottom line that we're looking at there. So certainly one of the things that we want to look at is like our product cost as well. Is like each week when we order food, how much does it actually cost to order all that produce? And then when we determine what that product cost is, how much is left over based off of the wastage that we have there as well.
So if I could summarize it a level above, we would essentially be measuring profits. So because now we're looking at how much money we are wasting, which really is just looking at profit. If we don't waste, we have more revenue, then we have higher profit. Okay, so good. Now essentially our North Star is let's increase profits. And so we're not just looking at revenue here. We're minimizing the bottom line and then thereby improving profit. Cool.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a good North Star metric to go for. And I guess like before we dive specifically into that, maybe I like to take a few more minutes just to see if I can think of any more metrics to kind of stretch my limits, because I think that'll help me determine if there's anything else we might be missing before we kind of like really dive in and like choose this as our North Star metric, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, totally. Sounds good.
Yeah. So I think a couple of other things is definitely, through this planning and ordering process is, I think another thing that, this is a bit of a side, but like how much time and energy it takes to potentially organize and plan this all out. One of the things is like each week, my team and I had to go through our ordering forms there. And we spent roughly like 30 minutes to an hour determining how much of each thing to order there. So I think another metric is probably like, if we want to really like specifically define it, is like time spent planning. Does that make sense to you?
Love that metric.
Yeah. Okay, so time spent planning. And then what other thing can I think of on this end for the planning process? I think another thing that I can think of when we're going through this planning phase and specifically figuring out is, so we talked about the monetary side, we talked about the time side. Perhaps one other thing we can think about for this is something related to like turnover, something related to a percentage of inventory that we have right now that we might be able to utilize from previously. But when I think about it more closely, kind of like that inventory rate, turnover rate for produce kind of goes back to that profit North Star metric.
Yeah.
So it seems like, in terms of like, if we take it like at the baseline level, like the time and money are the two core kind of metrics that we would be looking at there. So I don't think there would be any other kind of like potential core North Star metrics that I would want to pursue besides, looking at the ones that we currently have here.
So the time metric is very interesting because essentially it rolls up into head count. So if it doesn't take a lot of time, maybe we only need one worker, but if it takes a lot of time, then we need a lot more workers, which is another aspect of the bottom line. And then essentially everything just rolls into profit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So for the interest of time, I actually want to pause the interview here without kind of going into solutioning, because right now we're already in a good state. So basically, here's my commentary. By this time, the interviewer already knows whether this interview is a go or no go. If you set it up as well as this, then doesn't matter how you solution, you're gonna like just measure and use that North Star to then prioritize. And so the rest of the interview already does not matter at this point. So we can stop. Okay, so let's discuss. So my interviewer hat is off and now I'm just a friend. David, I'm curious to hear what you think about this interview.
Yeah, so I guess for me personally, this is actually very different than anything I've practiced for before as well. I think for me, coming in, when you talked about this being a product science interview and product design, I had the general framework I had in mind that I kind of expected to go off for that. And this is actually fairly different than that, which is a really good challenge for me. And I think really exciting because it allowed me to kind of think about this problem from a different perspective as well.
Oh, tell me. Oh, sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think coming in, when we were initially going through, I was very surprised that this would be framed around like me as a candidate and my interests. Because usually, this process is like they have like a specific question in place to be able to go through and like design out a specific kind of tech focused product, which is kind of like focused specifically on, either related to the company or related to the industry that company is working in.
Yeah, and so now we're just having a conversation. The reason why I like to anchor the problem on something that the candidate is already familiar about is then there's no excuse for, oh, I'm not familiar with the domain and that, right? I never want the candidate to feel that they were not set up for success. And having been there myself, when I don't know a lot about something. So for example, one time I was asked, I don't know, how would you improve Spotify? Like, I'm just not a Spotify user. I probably logged into Spotify maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. I could guess what it does, but I'm never going to just get, at least it's a feeling. It's a feeling that I just feel I'm not going to do a good job. Again, it's just a feeling. Even if you don't know what it does, you can probably guess. But if I'm guessing, I'm spending my energy guessing and not thinking, right? Thinking about the problem space and thinking about solutions. That's why I always want to just make sure the candidate feels comfortable with the domain, and then we can have a constructive and meaningful conversation. So that's why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's super valuable. I think from just going into kind of a meta-analysis about how I did, I think starting out with, because of that initial shock, I probably should have spent a bit more time asking questions and determining out, how I wanted to scope this. Because usually I come in with a sense of like what framework I want to use there. And generally we were able to follow most of that.
Yeah.
But I think because I was taken aback there, I should have spent more time asking questions to dive more into what you were looking for, get a sense of like the core kind of value you wanted to get out of this and the core kind of interview kind of components you really wanted to challenge me on there. I think for me personally, I got too much into the personal side and the personal experience. I don't know if that's kind of an area that you wanted me to focus on, but I probably should have asked beforehand and to allow you to get a sense of what my assumptions are, where I am coming in for this problem before diving more into what the specific users are that we wanted to focus on, the specific pain points there. I think that's an area that I could have improved on there.
That's fair. And you said that you already have some frameworks in mind. What are those frameworks for folks who are listening?
Yeah, so usually for like these product design focused questions, a typical one that you might get at tech company, as you mentioned, is like maybe like design a new feature for Spotify, or design a visual, like a TikTok like feature for Spotify. Like that's a very like standard question that you might get in tech. And a lot of the times the framework there is you go in, you ask questions, you get a sense of what you want to get out of this interview and how you're able to scope it out. And then once you go through the questions, I usually typically write on an outline. As you mentioned, I always first focus on the users and making sure that we have a key number of users in place, then choosing one of those key users to focus on. Then after determining what that key user is, figure out what their current user journey is like. And then from there, figure out what are some key pain points to focus on. I think that 3 model works really well, as you mentioned previously. And from those 3 pain points, kind of choose one pain point to really focus on that really maximizes their impact for that type of user, and then determine maybe like 3 solutions as well, and then choose one of those solutions to focus on. And that's usually, if there's more time after that, maybe also time to do any like go-to-market strategy, determine additional success metrics on those ends there.
So let me go over the notes that I took.
Sure, absolutely.
I wrote down here, let's not jump in yet. And this is exactly what you said. It's because you're surprised by this question, which is okay. The interviewer here, also depending on who the interviewer is, right? They'll try to pull you out of the weeds. Let's not focus on kitchen knives or operations yet. Like, let's talk about food. What other elements are there when we think about food? And this is related to the point that I raised earlier. Sorry, let me find it. This one. Did you pick a problem space, quote unquote, randomly? Right? And it's probably not random in your head. Like, you have a lot of reasons on why you picked it. But to the interviewer, because I'm not in your head, I feel it's random. And so it is your job to educate me on why you think focusing on kitchen operation is the right focus area for this question. So that's the first thing I wrote down. Then it's basically me prompting you, but okay, this is what we're talking about. Is it or should we talk about restaurants? Should we talk about groceries? Should we talk about delivery? Right? And then you're asking me, what area do I want to focus on? But here I'm thinking, I want to know what you think is important, right? And this is where I'm helping you decide what we should focus on. And so instead of asking me what I want to focus on, what you can say is, it's a different way of framing. You could say, well, I think this is important because of this framework that I have, whether it's on reach or on time savings or whatever it is. What do you think? Like, do you think that makes sense? Right? So now now I don't feel like you need my help. Now I feel like, oh, I understand what you're trying to do. If I disagree, I will chime in. But if not, I could just listen. I could just like sit back and relax and be educated, right? Okay, so then this is where I keep on asking, why are we focusing on this area? What is impactful? Then you're asking, okay, what is impact? And so I said, how about reach? But then again, what do you think is impactful? I want to know you. I want to know how you think. So rather than asking me, the advice here is propose something, and if I don't agree with you, I'll let you know. Okay. So then we went into, again, I'm trying to understand how you think about impact, right? And then I suggested reach. What does that mean? If we make the kitchen workers more efficient, what does that mean though? What is the outcome, right? So the output here is, yeah, they're able to work more efficiently, we're saving money, but okay, that's the output. But then the outcome then is, now the students are impacted in a good way. Now, what happens when the students are happy? Then we have the ripple effect, right? This is what I want to know. Are you able to think big? Are you able to ladder your feature up into something that is bigger than us, right? So if I'm the president of CMU, why would I care? Why should I care about putting a solution that helps kitchen workers? Why should I care? So that's why I was asking, okay, let's zoom out and keep on zooming out until you can ladder up as high as you can. And then now you go deep again. So this is where the interviewer is getting a sense on the depth and how you're looking at the problem. Are you able to zoom all the way out? And are you able to go all the way in? Then this is where the leveling comes in. So how does the interviewer assess level? This is one element to that. Okay, so then we basically, then we agreed, once we zoomed in, you're phenomenal. Once we're determined and agreed on the scope of the problem, and you're able to like really break it down in smaller sizes. What you do a very good job at is you're very good at summarizing. And so I'm taking notes too, but it's good to summarize. And for example, you kept saying, okay, let's summarize. And I put good because I kind of forgot what you said earlier. There's like so many points. Always good to summarize. And then again, you're saying, okay, there are two key points. This is good. It's not just helpful to summarize, but if you can label it, then it makes the interview a lot easier to follow along. At some point, if the interviewer is confused, then you're doomed. Then the interview is over, right? So you never want the interviewer to be confused. So this is very good. Okay, so that is a wrap of this mock interview. David, do you have anything else you want to share with the group?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I certainly think there's a lot I could have done on my end to, especially not only at the beginning part, but one of the things I think I could have done a better end is probably have made it a bit more conversational. I think I was able to kind of incorporate questions here and there and get your input after the major sections, but I think I could have done more to, get to make sure that I was going down the right direction as I continue to process and determine kind of the scope, both for the user, for the pain points. I think especially one of the things that you addressed is like bringing it back to the high level approach there. I think it is something that, I never have had to do in an interview setting before. And I think that's something that's incredibly valuable.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you for entertaining me with this topic. I actually have never thought about food this much. This is good. All right. So before we jump into Q&A, I want to circle back and do a quick check-in, because when I was thinking about how I was feeling when I was prepping, despite putting in over 100 hours, I was feeling very unsure still. There's just some element of this interview that is so ambiguous, and you never know, at least for me, I didn't know how on track I was. I was getting feedback here and there, but it was not consistent. Sometimes I would do well, sometimes I wouldn't. And so I created this masterclass program because this is based on my own experience. I believe that it's a very special way and unique way of helping people prepare and tackle product sense. This master class is a small cohort, but I really believe it would yield big results, because what we're working on is, first, we start with the PM mindset as the first foundational layer. When you have the PM mindset, this is where we're training product thinking muscles so that when you are faced with a new product sense question, you're not thrown off guard, because in your core, you have good product thinking, and then you could think through it clearly in a way that still feels like you have a handle on it. That's why I like to lead with what is a PM mindset? How should a PM tackle an ambiguous problem? And then we go into user empathy. And the empathy here is not just like first degree type of empathy. It's, okay, so let's say that the kitchen worker does a good job. Then what happens? What motivates them? Like, why do they care about doing a good job? It has to do with who's the second degree user. In this case, it's the CME students. What about third degree? In this case, it would be the CME president, and then maybe the parents of the students, right? And so when we're exercising user empathy, we're able to look at the problem from different dimensions. That then helps us anchor our solution, which leads to a third module, which is how do we position the solution? So the solution itself is great, but does it benefit the user and the second degree user and the third degree user? Does it benefit the company? Why? And why does it matter? Like, all of that is in the positioning. And then the fourth module, we master the craft, we tie it all together. And the special part is that this is a small and safe community. I remember feeling very overwhelmed, and I didn't really know who to practice with. It's like hit or miss. So I feel the community aspect would really add value to this masterclass. And then I'm also very excited about a bonus that I was able to put together for the masterclass, which is a live coaching session with Nanal Mehta. She is the co-founder of a startup called All Takes, which is all about transforming the community and helping the community go on these transformative journeys. And before that, she was a PM executive and head of product at YouTube. And then before that, she was at Google, LinkedIn, and Amazon. So together, I really am feeling very excited about what I was able to create in this masterclass. That's why I'm very excited to share with you all. Here's the coupon code if you are interested, that is available for the next 24 hours. Here's the QR code if you want to take a look. And let's dive into Q&A. So let's open it up to the audience. We have 40 people on the call. Who has questions for either David or for me?
All right, so I'm gonna go through the kind of questions that are in the Zoom Q&A. I'll just ask them, and then I think like
Okay.
some of them are directed towards people. Otherwise, it's just one of you can do it. So first one, way early on, was what is the most effective way to prep for PM interviews? Very general question. What do you all think?
I'll have David go first.
Yeah, I guess I can talk a little bit about my experience prepping for these as well. I watched a lot of YouTube videos about people doing mock interviews. I thought that was really helpful. I think having a good understanding of the current state of business and technology is very crucial, especially since a lot of these questions, as Nancy mentioned, are very focused on that company or like on that industry as a whole. It's good to have those numbers down as well. In terms of other resources, I also read the Cracking the PM interview book. I thought that was pretty good there. But generally, the best resources are definitely like the people that you're able to practice with. One-on-one tutoring is usually like the most, there's been a lot of studies that show that that's like the most successful way to improve your own performance in one area or another. And I think just having like people that you can practice with as you go through this process and like you kind of work through it with each other, I think is generally the most impactful thing that you can do. I don't know, Nancy, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I agree with the YouTube videos. When I was prepping though, there were no YouTube videos, but there were books. So I definitely recommend reading Cracking the PM Interview and what was the other one? Decode and Conquer, right? Those are very good books to read. It covers all the fundamentals, which is like frameworks. But then, okay, so that is prep 101. Prep 201 is let's practice your product thinking skills. And this you should try to, it's like exercise. Let's do it in bite sizes throughout the day. So when you're at home, when you're cooking, you're thinking, how can I improve this kitchen? Then you're thinking, who am I improving the kitchen for? It's for me. Who am I? I am someone who lives there. I need to cook for the family. Okay, how do I improve the kitchen for me? And then maybe you do that and I don't know, do something else. Then you go to your bedroom and okay, what can I do to make this bedroom better? Right. So the point I'm trying to make here is once your product thinking muscles are strong, it automatically kind of rewires your brain to have that mindset. You're always thinking about user empathy. You're always thinking about what is motivating the user. Why is this problem important? And then once you have that empathy embedded in you as muscle memory, then you're able to come up with creative solutions. So step 101 is understand frameworks, etc. Watch YouTube videos, binge those YouTube videos. And then when you're just going on with your day-to-day, always think, how can I improve this? How can I improve that? And that, I think, is the best way to practice.
Great stuff. Next question, also kind of related, it's a little bit general, but related to interviewing in general, is what characteristics is the interviewer? I guess this would be probably better for Nancy to start off with, but what were you looking for during the interview? What are kind of like, I guess, characteristics, boxes to check, all that kind of stuff?
So I'm not looking specifically for a framework. If the interviewer says, okay, I'm going to apply the circle method, I'm going to think, oh, book smart, but are you street smart? Can you then adapt, right? I'm really thinking, can I follow your thought process? I want to understand who you are as a PM. I want to know how you make decisions, because that then tells me, how are you going to make the call on the job? What are you basing your decisions on? Is it based on a user pain point? Is it based on some kind of company initiative, strategy, whatever, right? I just want to better understand how you make decisions. And to help me follow your thought process, you need to communicate very clearly, especially in a remote setting when you're not standing in front of a whiteboard, right? This is where David did a very good job reminding me and summarizing things for me. And then he numbers things. Okay, the first pain point is this, and then he labels it. Then I could have a better and clearer understanding of his thought process.
Well, yeah. Next question, this one specifically for David, is you did a wonderful job like staying organized throughout your responses and like structuring the way you kind of talked about them. And so do you have any like tips to actually like track your thought process during this? And I'm gonna kind of amend that as well and say like you spent like no time thinking. It was just talking about kind of your process, and you really like did a really good job kind of thinking out loud. How do you like, or do you have any tips to like be able to do that? And like how'd you get to that point?
Probably should have spent more time thinking then. I guess to answer that question specifically, I'm also the type of person that likes to think out loud as well. So I think that, helps on my end. I think, I've also gone through this process very extensively in terms of my practice. And I think going through a practice, like going through a lot of that fairly extensively, has helped me be able to develop an ability to be able to think and talk at the same time. I don't know if that kind of helps guide what you're thinking there, but I think like to start out, it certainly is very beneficial for any question that you get to first take a few minutes. What I always recommend is like, okay, once you get a question, the first thing I say is, thank you so much for the question. Can I take a few minutes to like write a few things down? And I think what really helped with this is because I already knew kind of related to food, kind of like maybe the way I wanted to frame this question, which I guess I was too eager to do looking back on that. Definitely being able to take time to write stuff down is really crucial. After you do that more and more, as you get into that process and you kind of like build out those muscles, as Nancy mentioned, it is like exercise in that sense. You develop almost like a second sense, I suppose, that'll help you be able to both think and talk at the same time. And I think that's something that's really valuable, is that it just takes a lot of time and energy to be able to get to that point. And I think from my experience, the ability primarily comes from most of the practice that I had to do to get here.
Yeah, I would agree. And also it's exactly like training for, I don't know, like a sports competition. It is literally muscle memory. And you also need to kind of get to know yourself a little better. For me personally, I cannot type and talk at the same time, but I can probably write and talk at the same time. I don't know why. When I'm typing, I'm just like super focused on typing, and I cannot speak, I cannot think. I'm just like typing. And so when I was practicing and I was trying to type at the same time, like it just didn't work. So you need to find ways that work for you, and everyone is different.
Great. And on the note of practicing, next question we have is, this one's also for David. It's more about kind of your experience. How did you get started with PM interviews? And more specifically, like, did you do any other internships before you got into a PM track? What brought you here, and like, why PM?
Yeah, so I guess for me, I learned about product management in my software internship. I work at a startup fintech company as a software engineer. And during that time, I had a chance to meet a product manager on the other side. And I was like, oh, what do you do for work? And they're like, oh, I do product management. I was like, oh, what's that? And then they drew this nice diagram, which is like business, CS, and like UX or something like that. I was like, well, I do two of those three. Might as well take a look at it. So over that summer of sophomore year, I read the Cracking the Product Management interview book. I also read the Cracking the Coding interview book. And basically going through that process was really helpful for me because I learned more about this job and more about what this was like. I think what really helped is that a lot of my personal interests really aligned with product management. And like junior fall, when I was prepping for all of my job interviews and all of the product management, new grad and internship roles there, what really helped is that it very much so aligned with my personal interest. I was president for the business technology group, an undergraduate organization. I was also a teaching assistant for computer systems. I was involved with my community as an orientation leader. And through all those initiatives leading out, I was also really big. I did a lot of hackathons freshman and sophomore year. And I think all of that kind of combined together, where it's like, oh, I could do, like, you can do this, you can make money doing this. This is so much fun kind of thing. So like when I was going through these actual interview questions, it was actually really interesting to be able to think through the stuff. And it is hard to think about this certainly on the spot. But I think what I found it really valuable was that, like, as I went through these problems, I actually, as crazy as it sounds, like, enjoyed the interview process, enjoyed thinking about these, whether it was like product design, product strategy, or whatnot. And because I was able to like really enjoy the interview process, I think the interviewers that I had also were maybe able to see that as well. And I think it really much so like aligned with, you know, all along those ends. And I think that, you know, worked out really well. I will also say is that, like, when I was going through this process, I did not know how hard these jobs were to get until afterwards. I just thought, you know, I just kind of applied for everything everywhere junior fall and was hoping for the best. And a lot of it is also due to luck. I think a huge factor, especially for any of these jobs, is that, like, there are so many qualified candidates. I had nothing that I think really, like, you know, stood out for me compared to other candidates. It is a huge amount of luck involved in this process as well. And I do feel incredibly fortunate for that component.
I want to +1 on what David said earlier, which is the energy level. So energy is it's when one person is attracted to another, and when your energy levels are kind of like resonating, then the interviewer ends up really liking the candidate, because they can then feel that, oh yeah, I can see myself working with David, for example. And that is where like the PM mindset is important, mastering the craft is important, the body language is important, and how you're talking to the interviewer is important, right? Like, so David said that he was thrown off guard by my question, but he didn't show it, right? He was very like excited to kind of talk through this exercise. Like, I did not feel any of the, oh my God, like I'm screwed type of feeling, right? That's energy. So a huge part of the interviewing process is also figuring out, like, what energy are you sending to the interviewer? That's very important.
Sounds really good. Energy, very great. Another question. I'm gonna go out of order-ish because I want to end with a different one, but it's kind of some examples of questions relating to cognitive psychology and product knowledge. So do you have any like things for just like anything that would like revolve around there, or examples of questions for health wearable devices like an Apple Watch? What could be like questions related to that, or resource or places to go to find questions about that?
Specifically about wearables?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of resources that are related to wearables, but like any other product question, it starts with, why would a user want to use it? What's the point? And what was the life before that product? And then what's the life after it? And what's the delta and why is that important? I would always start there.
Got it. Cool. Makes sense. All right. And then last question, I kind of want both of you to answer this. So we'll start with David, because, you know, you did do you were in the hot seat, but it's, can you like break down, I guess, kind of 4 to like 6, like general steps on how you go from a high level to your details and your solution? So kind of like, what's your general framework for how you approach these questions? How do you scope down, and how do you go about that? Both, I guess, for David, through your experience, like what you've done, what you think is the, like, I guess, the move. And then also then Nancy, what do you think is like ideal, or like, how have you like kind of taught people to do it?
Yeah, so I guess starting out for this question specifically, thinking about it at a high level, I think Nancy did a good job of guiding me to get to that point. I don't know if I would have, you know, specifically thought about it at such a high level without that initial guidance. I think in general, being able to kind of move across that vertical change, both from you specifically talking about the user and that pain point in that specific instance, bringing it to the higher level for that like user in a general setting, bringing it another higher level, maybe like multiple users or like a bunch of users, or all the users who are using this, and then the highest level setting, being like, how does this impact society as a whole? I think the most important part of this is definitely being able to apply an empathetic mindset and being able to have like a deep understanding of how this affects the user. I think that's a pretty hard thing to train, and it just requires, well, the best way that I've been able to find to really build upon that is just like learning about how different people live their lives, because that's the best way for me to improve my empathy and being able to understand, if you're building something out that affects millions or billions of people, it's very difficult to obviously understand every one of those lives. So what can I do as a product manager to be able to kind of understand maybe a snippet of that as well? So building upon that empathy, I think, is crucial to be able to understand the user at the specific level, and then hoping to be able to channel that to a broader level as well. I do think it's incredibly difficult to be able to really like think about it at a very high level, as Nancy mentioned, thinking about like for our specific question, how that affects like CMU as a whole, because it's very abstract, and the best way to potentially try to go about that, I think, is at the end of the day, if your product improves one person's life, then I think you've done a good job in that sense, and focusing on that core user is the most important thing to do. And then if you're able to find a way to tie that back up to the high level, it's usually about, compounding that effect for all those users that are involved.
Yeah, so I agree with David, and I'm going to repeat myself again. A lot of this is muscle memory, and a lot of this is a different muscle that we're exercising. So when I first started out, it was hard for me to think 1, 2, 3 dimensions out. For me though, journaling really helps, because when I'm journaling, my mind is kind of just going wild. And when I'm not constrained, then I'm able to just think freely. And the more you try to, and it's really just brainstorming, really. The more you brainstorm, the more you recognize patterns later on. So in the example of food, if I were to journal on food, then what am I thinking about? Well, high level bucket is always kind of like individuals and then businesses. And I think that type of pattern applies in a lot of different type of problems, whether it's like health or traveling or sports. There's always like an individual component, and then there's a business component. Okay, so that already nailed it down by like a ton, right? So who are the businesses in the food area, food industry? Then we have the restaurants, we have the cafes, we have delivery drivers, we have front office, we have back office. And you just think about it in terms of brainstorming. And then who are the individuals? We have the people who pay for food, the people who are being fed without having to pay for it, people who need to cook their own meals, people who don't want to cook. Right now, you're starting to segment. But when you're segmenting, you're also trying to recognize some patterns, because at the end of the day, the way you pick a problem to focus on is always, well, this is impactful, but why though? So I would say the first step is to just brainstorm, go as wide as you can, and then like figure out segmentation later, because the first step is let's go wide before we go deep.
Cool. All right. Very, very insightful things. That was our last question, and we're gonna kind of call it here. So do you guys have anything else you want to like add, say, talk about? Anything?
I have nothing on my end.
I want to say, don't feel discouraged, or like when you're feeling overwhelmed, there are ways to get help and ask for help. And I think step one is ask for help. But when you're asking for help, it's helpful to then understand which aspect are you needing help on, right? So when I remember when I was prepping, when I was feeling so overwhelmed, I would just say, help me. But then the person's like, okay, which part of the product sense? Like it's so wide, right? So then it required me to try a bunch of questions on my own. And then I'm able to figure out, okay, I always get stuck here. Segmentation, for example. And then I would then ask people, okay, how do you segment? Is it by persona? Is it by age? Is it by life stage? Is it by, I don't know, other things? And again, like how you're segmenting is, again, you're just brainstorming different ways to segment. So keep practicing. It requires practice.
Cool. Great. All right. Everyone, you heard that. Keep practicing. So yeah, I guess I just want to say like thank you to David. I know it was kind of a whole hour and 30 minutes of being kind of in the seat, but you did a really great job. Wonderful work.
Thank you.
And thank you to Nancy as well. Great job kind of facilitating everything and going through the feedback. A lot of valuable insights from both of you. So as for like to kind of close things out, we're going to be setting up the recording soon. If you have any like kind of further questions or stuff, you can probably, anyone in the audience, you can throw it into the Slack channel. We have hashtag questions or random anywhere, tag someone and they will see it. But yeah, that is everything for today. So yeah, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, everybody. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you for now. Bye. Have a good weekend.
Everyone.
Nice. I think that was successful.
Wait, I'm gonna